University Veterans History Project. Now, Bill, can you start us off with some background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
Well, first of all, my full name is Clyde Preston William Hardiman III. Was born without the William part, but being named after my father, for some reason they called him Bill, and they called me Billy when I was a kid. I'm hoping no one will call me Billy now. But when I ran, folks knew me ran for public office. People knew me as Bill, and so I added William to my name. So I was born Clyde Preston Hardiman, now William Hardiman III, born in Pontiac, Michigan in 1947, May 26, 1947.
Okay. What did your family do for a living in those days?
Well, my dad painted signs, which of course doesn't happen anymore. Everything's kind of printed up and done electronically, but he was quite a sign painter. He would go out and paint the windows of gas stations or buildings or whatever, and paint some advertisement for whatever business that was. He was very good at it. We had a pretty large family. We were poor. You'd have to paint a lot of signs to take care of 8 kids, I guess. But that's what he did. When I was 2 years old, my family moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And did he continue on as a sign painter when he did that?
He did. He did. My parents separated when I was about 14 years old, so Mom raised 8 kids herself, and she just did a phenomenal job with some very difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Now, where did you come in the sequence of kids?
I was the 3rd oldest of those living. I had a sister who died of childbirth, but I was the 3rd oldest. I had 2 sisters older than me, and so I was the oldest guy. So I kind of need to be the man of the family in some ways. But that's where I was, the oldest brother.
Okay. And then, how much education did you have?
Well, good education. Went to Franklin Elementary School right in Grand Rapids, and then South High School, same school as Jerry Ford, but not at the same time. And then college, I went to Grand Rapids Junior College back then. Now it's community college, Grand Valley State University, where I received my undergrad degree, then Western, where I received my master's in public administration.
Okay. Now, how far had you gotten in school at the point when you were drafted? Were you in junior college, or had you done some of that? Or
that's an excellent point. I really graduated from high school, went down to junior college, it was called at that point in time, did a semester, really didn't know what I wanted to do, got out and was drafted, and went back to school once I came back and was a little bit more focused and serious about life.
All right. Now, at the time you got drafted, did you have much of an awareness of what was going on in the world, or that there was a war in Vietnam, or any of that kind of thing?
You know, it seems sort of amazing now to look back at that time, but I can remember growing up, I thought, I don't even know who the mayor is, hardly know what a mayor is. I wasn't as aware. I mean, obviously, I knew there was a war going on, and that became more and more real to me as once I was drafted in the Army. But didn't know that much about it. Didn't know a lot of the politics around it. I was just a young kid. I was drafted.
When did you get the draft notice?
Oh, boy, I don't know. I mean, I went in to the Army in October of '66, so sometime a little while before that.
Right.
Went down to, I think it was Fort Knox, in intake. I was, at that time, a conscientious objector, so I went down to Fort Sam Houston, became a medic.
How did you go about the business of getting yourself classified as a conscientious objector?
I don't know. It was through my church. It was the Church of God at that time, and again, I was learning about life. Once I went over to Vietnam, you know, I remember going over, and one of the sergeants or whatever was handing out weapons, and I said no, and he said, well, no, you're going now, so there's no sense in, you know, claiming that. I said, no, that's what I believe. once I was over there, I kind of began to think about it for myself and not just my church. I mean, I'm a very strong Christ follower, so, but sometimes the church can dictate a certain thing, and I thought, you know what, I love my country, I want to protect my country, but I would certainly protect my patients and myself, being a medic, and so I realized I was always looking to see where the nearest, as we traveled, looking to see where the nearest firearm was in case I needed to grab it and protect, so that I thought, good grief, you might as well carry a weapon. So after about 9 months in Vietnam, I did carry a .45 for that protection.
Right. Okay, we're gonna go back sort of to
Sure.
You get inducted. Now, let's see, do they send you, so you're kind of processed at Fort Knox, or were you processed in Michigan first? And like, did you get tests and things like that in Detroit or someplace?
It's kind of hazy because of the years.
Right.
But I think there were some tests there, and then I went to Fort Knox,
Yep.
Induction, and then they sent us to Fort Sam Houston for basic training and also AIT training.
Okay. Now, what did your basic training consist of?
Everything except the firearms. And I tell a story quite often about that because I think I learned so much and really grew as a person and matured into manhood through my time in the Army. I remember going down to Fort Sam Houston, and we were going through our basic training, and you know, we're out in the field, and the sergeants are yelling at us and jumping us just like they do everyone else, and the pressure was very hard initially. Being a young kid, I had never been away from home to speak of, had never been out of the state of Michigan, and here I am away from family, away from home, and there's all this pressure on. And but I kind of knew how to behave myself, so I was just dealing with it. But I remember one day we were out in the field, and we were doing the low crawl and crawling under barbed wire, and my elbows and knees were being skinned up, and the barbed wire was catching, and it was just pretty miserable, and we were working hard, and we stopped and took a break. And I remember folks sitting out in the field under this tree, and the sergeant starting to talk to us. This was after a few weeks after we had been in. One of the guys said, "Hey," to the sergeant, he just said, "Hey, you guys aren't so bad. It's like you almost seem to be human. I mean, why are you so hard on us?" And I'll never forget what the sergeant said, and it has helped me in life. He said, when you leave here, some of you will go to Vietnam. You're going to be in a war zone. In essence, you're not used to being in a war zone. You have to learn how to obey orders, and you have to do them immediately without question. I'm not saying that everything in life you obey orders immediately, but you have to be able to move quickly. And if you take time to stand up and say, "Oh, I object to that order," you could be killed. And so we're going to put pressure on you so you'll know how to respond to that pressure when you get into the war zone. And that did something to me. In fact, right after that, when we went back to doing the low crawl and we were crawling under barbed wire and my knees and elbows were being skinned up and I was getting scratched from the barbed wire, there's almost a sense of joy or delight in here because I knew it was for a good purpose. And for me, again, my faith is very important. That relates back to my Heavenly Father. Sometimes we go through things that are very difficult, but they're really for our own good, and I've seen that in my life. And so that was one experience that I keep with me.
Okay. Now, was the company that you were training with, were these all people who were classified as conscientious objectors, or did you just kind of not do the weapons drills and that the rest of them did?
I believe this was at Fort Sam Houston,
Yeah.
So we were all conscientious objectors at that point in time.
What kind of, how did they otherwise treat you? I mean, you got the drill sergeants, people like that. At that point, did they sort of respect your decision and just treat you like anybody else, or did you get any kind of negativity from, or suggestion that you're trying to get out of something?
I think they did. They treated us pretty much the same. I mean, I have nothing to compare it with. Mm-hmm. It was when I went over to Vietnam, and I think got to Vietnam, and then, someone said, "Well, look, the gig's up, you know, well, you're here now, might as well take a rifle, and I didn't. As I said, until I began to examine my own feelings about it, and then 9 months into it, I did, because I knew that I would fight to defend my patients, myself, and now I see that I love my country, so I understand it a little bit differently than I did back then when I was a kid, basically.
Okay. What kind of people were you training alongside when you were down there? Where were they from, or what kind of backgrounds did they have?
Oh, all over. I mean, all over this region, I guess, because that's where we went. I don't remember the training as much. Again, some of it's kind of hazy because of the years. I do remember going off-site, ended up going to a church where I got to know some people there, and really enjoyed that. About the only other thing I remember very distinctly is standing in formation when we were going to be told where we were going. And I was, quite frankly, hoping to go to some place that where there wasn't necessarily a war. And I remember we were all standing in line, and we stood in line at parade rest, and then when our name was called, we had to come to attention. And they called my name, Private Hardiman, and I came to attention. And they said Southeast Asia. And there was a lot of concern, weight on my shoulders up to that time. And once they said that, I knew where I was going, and it was almost like the weight was taken off, and I was at attention. I saluted, I said, "Yes, sir," and went back to parade rest. And I knew where I was going, and the good Lord took care of me very well.
Okay.
But
so that happened after the AIT, sort of?
Right, after the training, and there's a time when you get your assignment,
right.
and we got our assignment.
Right.
So then we were able to come back home and then ship out.
Okay. And did your AIT go beyond just regular infantryman training? Were you now getting more specialized training?
Yes, training as a medic, okay. Although it wasn't very appropriate for where I was going. It was training for working in a hospital. Mm-hmm. We know how to make those beds real tight and move the bedpans around and all of that kind of thing, and give shots,
right.
And which most of that I didn't use when I was in Vietnam. When I went to Vietnam, if I could talk about that part, yeah. I will say this. I still remember going out, and I believe it was, I was shipped over to Oakland, and we went through Oakland. And I remember being on this bus, I believe it was Easter. Now, I haven't checked back on any calendar to see, but I believe it was Easter. It was a Sunday, and the bus was going through town, and I remember it went past this church, and I saw the people in their Easter clothes, the little girls dressed up in their dresses. Everything looked very nice, and I was yearning to go to church right then, but I was on my way over to a place that I didn't know if I'd come back from, but I remember that. Then we went to Vietnam. And
how did they get you to Vietnam? Did you fly or take a ship? Or?
I think it was a ship. It was a ship, or I believe it was a ship. And then we went up the coast up to Chu Lai. Mm-hmm. I remember sleeping out on the beach there the first night after we landed, and I'm wondering, aren't we out in the open here? I mean, I suppose my superiors know what they're doing, but I mean, it just seems like we were quite vulnerable. And then we went up to Chu Lai, where there was an actual sort of hospital there and a real doctor. Mm-hmm. And then we were moved out to the Line Battery. I can't remember if it was Duck 4 or Moduc. Those were the smaller mm-hmm. towns. And I was with an artillery unit. I was attached to an infantry unit, and we were on a hill, the big guns. And but when we first landed, we were at the hospital. I remember this incident. And there was 6 medics in this tent. I was one of 6 medics in this tent. Some had been there for quite some time. I was brand new, and they were kind of telling us what would happen. And all of a sudden, we were hit by a mortar attack. And there was this hill next to us, and on the other side of the hill was the ammo dump. Well, I didn't know much about the weapons of warfare, but the Kong with their mortars, hit the ammo dump, and it started to explode. And someone said, hit the deck, you know, and they didn't have to invite me twice. And I, like all the other folks in the tent, I dropped to the ground, and I was so afraid, and the ground was hard, but I felt my fingers, I could almost still feel them digging into the dirt. I wanted to dig in and cover myself up. And I looked up through the opening in the tent, and it looked like the 4th of July, because I thought, boy, these mortars are really incredible, but actually they had hit the ammo dump, and tracers and whatnot were just exploding. And I don't know how long we were there, but something happened that changed everything. Someone ran by the tent and yelled one word, medic. And every one of those guys jumped up, grabbed their aid bag, and ran out to help someone. And I had just landed, didn't know what I was doing, but I thought, I am not going to shirk my duty. I'm not going to be left here. So I grabbed my aid bag and ran out, didn't know where I was going, ended up running toward our perimeter, and just looking for someone to help. And I realized something, that courage is not the absence of fear. I don't think you can be courageous if you don't fear, but it's overcoming that fear and doing the right thing regardless. And I remember running toward the perimeter, and this guy was in this foxhole, and he said, "Are you nuts? Get in here." And he didn't have to invite me twice. I jumped right in the foxhole. But that was my initiation. And then I was moved out to the line battery, where I actually became, everyone called me Doc. I mean, I was the doctor. I mean, I wasn't a medical doctor, but everyone knew if you get hurt, this is the guy. So I had pretty good treatment while I was out there. And I took my responsibility very seriously.
Okay. Describe the position where you were assigned. Kind of what was there, what did it look like, what was the country like around it?
We were on a hill, and with our hooches, huts there, sandbag, made out of sandbag, and that's where we lived. There was a perimeter around the edge of the hill. There were gravel or, hardened ground, walkways to the various sites, mess hall and others. And there was a road that led down to the village below, and we were, I guess, protecting that village, Vietnamese village. There were kind of woods, jungle around us. The infantry was there, and every once in a while they would have to go out, and they kind of marched down that hill. You never knew who was coming back. Someone had, I love basketball, and someone had set up a couple of baskets, and the ground was just hard because they had played on it so often. So you could actually bounce the ball, and it may not come up very straight, but you could bounce the ball. And I remember playing basketball, and I loved doing that because I actually escaped Vietnam when I did that. I'm very competitive, so I was only on the basketball court. I wasn't in Vietnam, I wasn't in the United States, I was just on the basketball court, and I wanted to win that game. But then sometimes the game was interrupted. I remember one time a guy was handling a landmine, and he didn't disconnect it. I don't know if he's just lazy or what, and the cry for medic went out, and I ran over, and by the time I got over there, they were picking up body parts and throwing them on a rubber bag. And so I just helped them do that. Other times we were interrupted, and the infantry had to go out, and we saw them grab their equipment, and they marched down the hill, and not knowing if they'd come back. So it was sort of surreal in that way, that all of a sudden you're playing basketball, and you're only in the basketball court, and then immediately you're brought right back to Vietnam. At times there were firefights. Our big guns were there, and could shoot quite a distance, and sometimes we'd see over on a distant hill, maybe Charlie was out there, and you'd see these helicopters, and it was pretty incredible. You'd see the copters come out, and at night it was like almost like a fire show, and they just pepper an area, and you could see the tracers, and you just watch the whole thing. Also, sometimes the jets would come out, and it was incredible because they'd go faster than the speed of sound, so they'd come out and they'd swing down, and they're peppering an area, then they'd swing back up. And the idea was that, you know, Charlie would come out and look out once it'd stop, and then all of a sudden they'd come back again and pepper the area. Again, you could see the tracers. It was pretty incredible. And then, of course, sometimes we, you know, had to deal with attack ourselves. Sometimes attack came from another area. I called it a general scare. The word would get out that the general's coming and we've got to fix this place up. And I just thought it was kind of a little strange that we're trying to clean up the dirt, and our houses were made of dirt, sandbags, but we wanted to clean it up so the general would think it looked nice. I mean, we're in a war. But anyway, I did it because that's what we're supposed to do.
Were you in the same place for your full tour, or did they move you around?
No, I was in the same place. We were about to be moved when I was leaving. Our unit was going up close to the DMZ. But I think what was really very meaningful to me was, as Doc, I was almost like, I don't know, you think of the bartender. I was the guy that people would come and talk to, or I would do things that I had never done before. As I said, my training was more for a hospital, and that's not where I was. And so when I got there, the medic leaving said, well, here's some more equipment. It was a suturing kit. And I don't know where they picked it up, and I know someone brought me one. I don't know if it was old or what. I think it was old, because I remember, and I sewed people up. You just did what you had to do. I dealt with an ingrown toenail. I had never seen an ingrown toenail before, but I was kind of calm enough to let folks know that they thought I knew what I was doing, and I'd figure something out and do it. And I remember this second lieutenant. He was gung-ho, as second lieutenants seemed to be, and he came and woke me up in my hut one time, and he said, Doc, get up. I got this cut over my eye, and, you know, fix me up. I said, well, sir, I can call in a chopper and send you back to the real doctor. He said, no, I don't want to do that. I got to get back to work. I've got to get back to my men. I said, sir, are you sure? He said, yep, fix me up. And so I got out my little suturing kit, and I said, let me give you a little something to kill the pain. He said, no, just sew it up. I said, sir, are you sure? Yes, just take care of it. So I started suturing him up, and unfortunately the needles were old, and the needle broke. One of them, I put a stitch in inside, and I just said, oh, excuse me, sir, just one moment. And I went and got another one, took that out, and sewed it up. And he came back later on and said, hey, Doc, great job. Don't even have a scar. This is wonderful. I said, thank you. Thank you, sir. It was the kids, I think, that I was very impressed with. I love kids, and the kids would come up on the road.
So these are the Vietnamese kids from the village?
Vietnamese kids. And I remember that some organization sent us a big box of candy every month. I mean, they were trying to be nice, but boy, if we ate all that candy, our teeth would rot and fall out. So I started going to the gate, and I would give the kids some candy. And the first day, and I'd go at the same time every day. First day, there might be 3 kids there. And then the second day, and they all knew me, Doc, here comes Doc, there might be 6 kids there. And the third day, 12 kids. And the crowd just kept growing and growing. And so we had our green fatigue jackets, and I used to put a little candy in my pockets, and I'd go there. Well, after a while, it got so big, I had my aid bag, then I had another bag full of candy. And I started going to the other soldiers. I said, are you going to eat that candy? Of course not, Doc, take it. So I had tons of candy, endless supply. And I started going and just befriending the kids, talking to them, giving them candy. And after a while, I met a couple of kids that I adopted. I didn't actually adopt them, but they were my kids. They were Song and Dup. And I love those two little girls. And later on, a little boy had been hit by white phosphorus. His name was Mott. And I can't remember his sister's name, but I think I had a picture at home. But I would start treating his wounds. And I almost wanted to adopt him, but I would have had to extend to adopt him. I just kind of felt that, okay, if you buy it now, there's nothing you can do. If you extend and buy it, then it's kind of your fault. That's the way I thought back then. And so, but but Song and Dup, and they were beautiful little girls, and I think they might have been 10 or 12, but they seemed so little. I used to pick them up and hold them. They just seemed little. And after a while, I kind of organized it where the other soldiers sort of adopted kids too. We'd bring them on the hill sometime on Saturday and give them candy and just befriend them. And even to the point where one was sick, one of the soldiers woke me up and said, "Doc, you got to come help my son, my boy." And he took me down into the village, and I'm walking, does someone have a rifle or something? Because we could take it out, but we went down and I tried to help his little boy, and actually I ended up sending him to the hospital. But at any rate, Song and Dup were two beautiful young kids, and I've told this story many times to many classes when I speak in school. Song was rather impetuous. She just did things. But Dup, she could wrap me around her little finger. I mean, she'd look at me with those pretty eyes and she'd say, "Doc, I do what you say." I said, "I know, and you're such a good little girl." And here's an example. One day I was walking down the hill going to the village, and on the side of the road there was a house of ill repute. And I looked over and I saw my two girls outside, Song and Dup, and I said, "Song, Dup, what are you doing over here? You know you shouldn't be over here. Doc doesn't like that." And they said, "Oh, we don't do nothing, Doc." And I said, and I walked up to Song and I said, "Song, are you smoking?" And she said, "No, Doc, I don't smoke." And she had her arms behind her back like that, and there was smoke coming up from behind her back. And I said, "Song, you throw that cigarette away. That's not good for you. Doc doesn't like that." And so she threw it away, but Dup came up to me and she looked at me with her pretty eyes and said, "Doc, I know smoking." I said, "I know, honey, you're such a good little girl." All right, let's go back to the candy. I would come down, hand out the candy, but sometimes the crowd got so large, they started to press up against me and try to put their hands in my bag to get the candy. And so I'd take a handful of candy and I'd throw it on the ground. This sounds horrible, but they were almost knocking me over. And they would dive on the ground and scratch around on the dirt. The candy was covered with paper, but still, you know. And so I could stand up and finish passing out candy. But I told my girls, I said, "Listen, you're Doc's girls. I don't want you to scratch around in the dirt for the candy. So if you trust me, and if you wait, I'll give you the most and I'll give you the best." I said, "Okay, Doc." And so I did that again and again. And one day, I could tell Song was excited when the kid would scratch around in the dirt for the candy. I'd come out, start passing out candy. First, they were okay. After a while, the crowd would press up against me. They were always about to knock me over. I'd put my hand in the bag and throw the candy on the ground. The kid would dive on the ground and get the candy. I'd start passing out candy. Dup would just stand there. She wasn't even watching. She knew I'd take care of her because I'd done it. Song knew it too, but she was excited by watching the kids scratch around in the dirt for that candy. After about 3 or 4 days, one day I could tell. I was passing out candy after I'd thrown some on the ground, and Dup saw the kids getting their candy first, and she'd look at me, and she'd look at the kids, she'd look at me, look at the kids, and pretty soon she was rocking. I could tell she was trying to decide, and out of the corner of my eye I saw her dive down in the dirt to get that candy. And I thought, "Oh, Song, why'd you do that?" And afterwards, I didn't give her any more candy because I wanted her to learn a lesson. But Dup came up to me and said, "Doc, I do what you say." And I said, "I know you did, honey, and here's the most and the best." And I've told that story so many times to kids to say, wait for the best thing, wait for the right thing. And I've had kids come back to me even after a couple of years and remind me of that story. So that was one of the things I picked up in Vietnam.
Okay. Now, how regular was it to go into the village and that kind of thing? Could you go down during the day just when you wanted to, or?
I usually didn't go very often. Some of the guys did. Some of the guys stopped off at the house there. Yeah. But I didn't go down very much. Usually if there was a reason, someone needed my help, or one time someone was pregnant. I thought, oh, no, wait a minute, this is way outside my understanding. But at any rate, we tried to help out where we could. But so once in a while, I would go down. But most of the time, I was up on the hill.
So most of the stuff with the kids is they've come up to the hill to get the candy, that kind of thing.
They would come to the hill to get the candy.
Around you right up there.
And sometimes I would go down, but just for recreation.
Now, did any of the Vietnamese civilians come onto the base at all? I mean, did they do any work for you or anything like that?
They did. I can still remember the barber and the guy that shaved us and cut our hair, and I still remember this blade that he had, and he was coming up my neck, and I'm thinking, this really could be a Viet Cong, and he could just take my life right now. He didn't, thank God. What seemed amazing to me was we were there fighting, and this war to me was different from other wars. In other words, you're taking territory. What was morbid about Vietnam, because it was the first where this terrorist element seemed to enter, was that you couldn't tell if you were winning the war by taking ground, because you didn't take ground. So you had to use body count, which was very morbid. The other thing was, you know, who knew who was who? Sometimes you're fighting, and if a guy's out there with a rifle, you shoot at him. If he puts it down and picks up a hole, you protect him. So who really knew if these folks who were coming on to the camp, who were shaving us, were Kong or not? It wasn't like the suicide missions of today, because you just wouldn't allow that. But that was the strange part of the war to me.
Now, was the Viet Cong active enough in the area to cause any problems in the village or for the villagers that you were aware of?
I think so. I don't remember all the specifics, but I think they seemed to be all over.
All right. Now, as a medic for the artillery unit, did you look after, to some extent, just the people in the village in the area, and then the men in the unit you're assigned to? Would you also help out with the infantry? I mean, if they had patrols and had casualties?
Right. Any soldier that was there, any one from the armed forces that was there, I would look after. And I don't think we had to, but I tried to help the people that were there, because they were people. Right. I do remember after a while, a year seemed like such a long time. I mean, I was a kid. The other guys were kids. And I remember there was some nurses from Canada. I don't know where I saw them, but I just remember listening to them, and it was amazing to hear a woman who spoke English, but I mean, it was just really kind of delightful to hear that after a while. And after a while, you know, after 10 months, 11 months, the other thing was, you didn't go over to fight with your unit until the war was won. You went over for a year. So people were coming and going all the time. I think that's also was a different element with Vietnam that helped to change maybe the nature. There's something about the camaraderie that you build a unit. Here, the goal was to make it for a year, and then you could go home. I'm proud to have served my country. There's some who took off to Canada and didn't do it. I was proud to have served my country, even in kind of a crazy war like that. But I was anxious to go home. I remember getting stuff in the mail. I think my little sister sent popcorn or something, which by the time it got there was stale or pie, but it was really wonderful. And I wanted to see my family. And I remember when we got short, our time was short, we carried around this little stick that they make over there. It's called a short timer stick. And I remember walking proudly around like the other guy had done when he was short. And everyone knew that my time was short. And I still remember leaving, and when I got down to a place where we were going to fly out from, I remember walking up to the plane thinking, man, I'd hate to get it right now when I'm almost on the plane. But it was quite an experience, and I learned a lot about life, and I served my country. And there's something about being a soldier. I admire those who served the country back then, prior to that, and those who serve the country now. And even in the Michigan Senate, where I served for 8 years, we had a Memorial Day service. And as veterans, we would stand there. Everyone would get a flag that was folded if someone from your district gave his life. Mm-hmm. And I've had to walk up and put my flag in the basket. It represents a whole life and all the people that know that and love that individual. And it was a very meaningful time. And then, because I was a veteran, I would stand next to the basket as others came, and we would receive those flags. And I would stand at attention, knowing that hearts were breaking from people in the audience because they were seeing the power of that moment. But I realized that I was there to do what's right and to serve, even through difficult times, because we had served in a difficult time in Vietnam and done the right thing. I felt what we were called upon to do, and I was still serving and still a soldier trying to do the right thing, even now in life. So my time there taught me a lot about life.
I want to kind of go back and fill in some other pieces of the picture and the experience here. One thing was, you in a way were in kind of an unusual situation in that you did stay in the same place the whole time and with the same unit for the whole year, and you weren't moving around and that sort of thing. Now, my impression, just in passing, was that you were not taking a whole lot of casualties either. I mean, would you get hit by mortars periodically or things like that?
Sometimes, yes.
Were there ever like sappers trying to get into the base or ground attacks that you can recall?
I can remember preparing for some of the things, and I don't know if I blocked out a few things, mm-hmm. but I don't remember anyone getting into the base. Mm-hmm. We pretty well fortified, and most of our efforts seemed to be shooting our big guns, and mm-hmm. It was quite a distance, and sending down the infantry
right.
that actually fought. I do remember as Tet was beginning, and mm-hmm. And the preparation and the tension there rose quite a bit, and mm-hmm. I think that's one of the reasons why my time to leave seemed to be right in one situation, although I didn't want to leave. I mean, in a way, you hate to leave the people that you care about, mm-hmm. including Mott, who right. I asked the medic that was coming in to replace me, he said, would you please take care of this little boy? Now, I don't know if he did or not, and I hope he did.
Now, you also mentioned, I also kind of asking that in part because you were talking about how because everyone is on their own clock or their own calendar, you don't have the same kind of camaraderie you do where if you train with people and go over as a unit. But you would have had a certain amount of continuity at least. There'd be people that you're there alongside for X number of months.
Oh, yes.
And you're not taking large numbers of casualties, which means there is at least some room for the new guys to get oriented, to learn the job,
absolutely.
do it well. And so in a way, that side of the replacement system functions reasonably well.
Absolutely. There were folks that we obviously got to know. Like I said, I was doc, so people would come to me not only with their ailments and whatnot, but with their stories of what was going on in their life, and I would talk to them about that. But I think there's something to be said that here's a unit, we're going over to accomplish a purpose. Mm-hmm. We're going to stick to it until we accomplish the purpose. Right. We may lose some, but then we're going to go home together. Mm-hmm. That part was different. Right. Again, all I've experienced is Vietnam.
Okay. Now, did you have kind of a daily routine while you were living on the base?
Yes, but I can't remember it very much. I think mostly my duty was just taking care of folks and dealing with emergencies as they came up, where a lot of guys had to take turns doing something that I thought was a joke when I first heard it. When I first landed over, they said they burned the manure.
Waste, yep.
And that's not what they called it, but anyway, and I thought, oh, come on, it's, you know, you're pulling my leg because I'm new. Mm-hmm. And then in formation, they said, no, they're going to start picking out guys to go and that's their duty. I think I'd rather have KP, but, and I remember kind of trying to be inconspicuous in the crowd as people actually did that, and I thought, this is crazy. Of course, we didn't have plumbing over there, so that's what they did. But
so they're like pouring diesel fuel onto
right,
barrels of it and setting fire to it?
Right. You had a big pot and the latrines were there, and that's where everything went, and you burned it, and which just, I'd never heard of that. But, so there were various duties. Mm-hmm. Once I went to the line battery, I was excluded from all of that. So it was mainly being on hand and working with folks, but ready to help.
Because I guess to a certain extent, your job was kind of to wait for something to happen. They had to generate business for you.
Right. And perhaps that's why I kind of became the counselor mm-hmm. and the friender of the kids and everything else, because we did have free time, but when we got busy, and there were times that things happened, and then you were busy.
Now, did you get any R&R time during that year? Did you get to go off the base?
Actually, I didn't go off the base. I don't remember doing that. I remember some guys were going certain places, and they were talking about some of the things they like to do, which some of them I didn't do because mm-hmm. of my beliefs and whatnot. But I didn't really, I don't think I ever went off the base. Okay. I mean, I went down to the village, right. but not to another site.
Would you ever get sent back to the hospital or anything like that, or just stay at your post?
Well, we did travel some, mm-hmm. because I remember being in a chopper. I remember traveling on the road in the Jeep, and that's kind of where I thought through. Yes, I couldn't think of it. Some of this is coming back now. We did travel some, and that's where I really started to think through, because I found myself, before when I wasn't carrying a firearm, I found myself, and this is just the way I think, what am I going to do if this happens or that happens? And these guys get hit, I'm going to grab this gun and protect. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, Bill, you've kind of answered your own questions. You will protect. Mm-hmm. And so I took like I said, about 9 months into it, I took a 45 so I could protect my patients and myself. But so we did travel. I do remember traveling on a chopper. I remember going up, and I don't know if we were heading back to the base or taking folks somewhere, but I remember looking at the puffs of smoke as Charlie was shooting at us, and I remember wanting to move myself around, but where can you go? I thought it'd be pretty bad to get hit in the butt while you're flying up here, but anyway, that's just what happened. So yes, I did travel somewhat. I just, and I remember, come to think of it, I do remember the old kind of Jeep-like medic trucks mm-hmm. with the big red cross on it, almost like what you see in MASH, mm-hmm. which is kind of amazing that we haven't changed very much. But yes, even as I talk about it, some of that's coming back to me.
So you might take patients to a hospital or go to some place where they brought
right.
a aid station or some place where they brought casualties,
right.
and you can help out.
Right.
So there is some movement back and forth there.
Yes, I did do that. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. You're very good.
Do our best. All right. Now, on a different side of things, what was there? I mean, you played basketball. Was there anything else to do for entertainment or to kill time when there wasn't much going on?
I'm sure there was. I just
would guys play cards or that kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't. Oh yeah, yes, I did play cards. I love playing Tonk. And ticked me off. This guy always seemed to be able to. He knew right when to come down. I was thrilled if I could beat him even a few games. But so yes, we would do things like that. And as I said, there were other activities that some of the guys did, drinking and whatnot.
See, now you said you got some packages from home once in a while. Would you write home regularly, or did they write you, or how did that work?
I think I wrote sometime, and they would write me, my sister, my mom. It's amazing. I don't know how healthy some of the things were that had to take that much time to get there, but it tasted good because it was from home. Right. But yes, and that was very meaningful to get things from other people. I think there was a group that would send cards or letters out to some of the soldiers, which was also meaningful. Anytime you got anything from home, it meant something, even whether you knew the person or not, but certainly from those that you know and love.
Now, some of the larger bases, they might actually bring entertainment of one kind or another out there, whether it was bands from the Philippines or USO things. Was your base too small for that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was too small. Most of our visitors were the generals coming through to inspect, and then we'd have the general scare, as I called it.
Right. Yeah. Did you have much of a sense of what was actually going on in the war while you were there, or did you just stay focused on your own immediate area?
Again, it's pretty hazy because of the years, but I think we had some sense. We'd hear reports. We knew that things were cranking up. We knew some of the things that were happening up near the DMZ, but that was just, you hear from the infantry usually because they're moving around and they'd come in. But so we did have some sense. I don't have a sense that I was really that well informed on it all.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Did you have sources of information beyond just what other soldiers said? I mean, were you reading Stars and Stripes, or was there radio you could listen to? Or
I think there was, but I just don't. That's not what stood out to me over the years. I guess it's funny the things that do stand out or don't.
Okay. How would you characterize morale in the unit that you were with? What was kind of the attitudes of the guys around you?
I think it was pretty decent for the situation that we were in. I mean, obviously, folks, some were very gung-ho, like the 2nd Louis. Some were doing okay and biding their time. I think some liked Army life. Most folks wanted to get back home to what we call the real world. We heard the different songs. I think the one song, I'm trying to remember the group, but Give Me a Ticket for an Aeroplane, Ain't Got Time to Take a Fast Train. I mean, that was real big about the time I was getting ready to go back home. I don't know when it came out. I remember at South High School, there were a few folks that were famous. Obviously, President Ford went there, but Al Green went there about the same time I did. He's a singer. I remember getting back home later on, and he had hit it big. His brothers, they used to sing in these gospel quartets that I used to sing in. I had a group, and I guess he did too early on. And then all of a sudden I got back home and I heard his song on the radio. Someone was giving me a ride. I think he was. And I said, that's your song. Where have you been? Well, I've been in Vietnam, but now it's being played on popular music. So there are a lot of things that you missed, but a lot that I missed, obviously.
Okay. Now, some of the stereotyped images of Vietnam and what went on in Vietnam, and there's a certain kind of standard list of things. One of them is racial tensions. There's also issues of drug use and people going out of their way to get behaving badly or trying to get kicked out of the military and a lot of that kind of thing, or even fragging officers and that sort of stuff. Were you aware of sort of any of that going on around you?
Racial tensions, yes. Yes. Drug use, It's like more, I was aware more of alcohol abuse, but I didn't drink alcohol, so I wasn't as attuned to all of that. But and I think there were some who, I don't remember any specific situations, but who just were misbehaving because that's what they did in general.
Can you talk a little bit about what sort of form racial tensions played themselves out in, or in what ways were you aware of people's attitudes or that kind of thing?
I just remember one of the docs, he seemed to be a nice guy, but when he drank a little bit too much, he'd start to make some comments toward me. It's unfortunate, but that's just what happened. But figure I've got to survive and keep pushing and do what I'm there to do, so I did it. Fortunately, I didn't have to spend my whole year there. It was just initially when I first came in. He was at the hospital, or at the, maybe it was at the unit that I was from.
Right.
And,
okay, but when you were out there in the field, out on that fire base, did people worry about that kind of stuff?
I didn't notice a whole lot out there. I'm not saying it didn't take place at all, but I didn't pick up on as much there. I think, from my standpoint, people were trying to survive. And, you know, there was I remember this African-American sergeant who was, seemed like a real stand-up guy, big, strong, real leader. Well, actually, I remember playing basketball with him, and he would do these behind-the-back passes. I think people were trying to survive at that point in time.
Because that does seem to be a fairly consistent pattern. I mean, the farther away you get from the rear areas and the safe areas, and you're more out there, you need each other than most of the rest of the stuff.
Absolutely.
You don't worry about so much.
Absolutely. I think, I don't know that people saw color when they saw me. They saw Doc. And whether it's the second lieutenant waking me up or it's the African-American soldier that wakes me up and says, hey, my kid's sick, come help him. I'm meaning his Vietnamese kid that he adopted. I was just the doc. And I think people saw each other that way a little bit more, again, away from the higher in rank and superiors.
Okay. Now, as your time was coming to an end, did anybody make an effort to encourage you to re-up and do another tour or anything like that?
They may have. I don't remember it. I'm a pretty independent thinker. And again, I thought about just extending just to do the adoption, but decided against it. I do miss, I miss some of those kids after a while. I mean, but, you know, I'm a single guy. I think I was 18 when I went over, 18 or 19, so what did I know?
Yeah. All right. Now, once your tour was over and they're sending you back to the States, did you still have time left on your enlistment?
I had 6 months, which I served in Wilmington, Ohio. And so it was 6 hours away from home. I know because I drove that time. I'd come home as often as I could, and I wanted to be home so badly that we had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And try as I might, it seems like I was always leaving around 12 o'clock at midnight and driving like crazy to get back in time. But I just, it was hard to get away from home before that time.
Okay. Now, at the point when your tour ends, your year is up, you get to leave the base and go back home. And do you remember anything about that trip, or leaving the base or crossing the ocean? I mean, did you fly back, or did you?
We flew back.
Okay.
I remember, as I said, I was about to get on the plane to take off, and I'm thinking, boy, I hope I don't get it here, because it was just almost on the plane. And then I remember we landed in, was it Washington? I think it was Washington.
It might have been this. A lot of people landed in Seattle, Tacoma.
Yeah. And I remember a couple of things. We landed, and I was so thrilled to be back in the United States of America, and I remember that I seemed to love the country more when I came back than I did when I left. I think when you give something, just like our families, when you sacrifice and give, it's just like you love them more. Well, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So we gave the treasure of our risking our lives and our time. But I remember when I landed, I wanted so badly to get out and just get down and kiss the ground. I didn't, because I thought, oh, people will probably be looking, but you know, we were at the airport, but I had this urge to just do that, just drop down and kiss. It would have been concrete or something, but kiss it. But then I remember walking in the airport, and I saw this young lady with these shoes, and the straps came up as high on her ankles, and I thought, boy, the styles have really changed a lot in a year. But it may have just been, it was on the, you know, the West Coast, and I was from Michigan. But so you notice those kind of different things. But it was just what a thrill and a joy to be back home.
So there, they didn't have any anti-war protesters around when you got in, or anything like that?
I don't remember them. Now, I know that it was a very unpopular war, and sometimes people took it out.
A lot happened in Oakland, and the people who fly in at Oakland talk about it, maybe not necessarily up in Washington.
I think I was probably saved from that. Now, I do know that we understood, we Vietnam veterans, that it wasn't popular. So a lot of times you just didn't mention that you served, which is a shame. I mean, even it could be another Vietnam vet. I've heard of people working next to each other in a factory, one machine next to the other for 10, 12 years, one not mentioning to the other that they served in Vietnam. I talk about it a lot now because I just think we ought to honor those who served, even if we don't like the war. But I do remember experiencing that and kind of seeing some of the disdain, but I don't remember a lot of the protests and whatnot.
Okay. Now, when
personally, I mean, I've seen them on TV, and of course.
Now, when they send you out to Wilmington, Ohio, what were you doing there?
It's funny. I remember very little of what I did there. I think there was it was a base. I think it was a medical unit there, or a hospital or something, and it was pretty boring compared to Vietnam. Mainly, I remember getting off base, coming home. That was. Those were my big memories. I remember hardly nothing of being there.
Okay. And that's also a period. I mean, this is you come back in the spring of '68, and then that middle part of '68 was a pretty crazy time in this country. I mean, Martin Luther King gets killed. Johnson decides he's not going to run. You get Robert Kennedy getting killed, and the election, all the rest of that stuff going on. Did you pay much attention to that, or did you?
Oh yes, yes. And I was very attuned to it. Because, you know, the riots, I just, you're trying to understand it all, and I'm thinking, why are blacks rioting in their own areas? I mean, not that I want them to hurt anyone else, but it just doesn't seem to make any sense. But I think the anger, sometimes it's not always logical. I remember Kennedy's. I remember thinking that, I mean, I'm a Republican now, but I thought Bobby Kennedy was a pretty good guy, and thought he might have been a better president than his brother John, but then he was shot too, and Ted was left, and I didn't want him to be president, but I mean, that's just my own opinion. But and then of course Dr. King and all that went around there. It was an incredible time, just absolutely incredible time, and that's partially why being on the base just didn't seem to. I hardly have. I don't have much memory at all of that.
All right. Now, when you finally do get discharged, then later in '68, you go back home then to Grand Rapids and try to pick up where you left off?
Right, right. I did. I remember wanting to get a GTO. I remember I sent money home, but I think it was a '68, and I wanted to get. I love white cars. I still have white cars now, but I remember wanting to get GTO, the GOAT. Yep. And I think when I first got back, I got a Mustang to drive back and forth, and I think I got. I couldn't afford a GTO, so I got a Le Mans, same body, but it doesn't have the big engine and whatnot. But it had the bucket seats, and so that was cool. And then just went back to work, and then eventually went back to school.
Well, what kind of job did you get when you got back?
Well, let's see. I think I worked at Dexter Lock. I think I worked there. I can't remember if I worked there just when I got back or if I worked at GM. I know I worked at GM when I started school again, and I worked full-time. I went to school full-time. I think I was married by that time. I was just trying to catch up on life because I felt like I had let some time slip away, so it was time to knuckle down, and so full-time doing both.
And were you able to use GI benefits for tuition and things like that?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I was. But that was a little while later. So, yeah, that was much later. Come to think of it. So I think for a while I just went back to work for a while.
Okay. And then when you went to where you went, did you finish up at the junior college first and then go on to Grand Valley, or did you just go to Grand Valley after you started up?
Actually, it was a while before I went back. I went through a 3.5-year marriage, and then I married Clova, my wife now of 37 years. And she went back to school and got her master's from Western. She really encouraged me. She said, "Bill, you've got a lot to offer. You should go back to school." And then I went back and I just went straight through to get my master's. But that was back in '73, I think it was. And then I just did 2 years junior college, 2 years Grand Valley, and I even started Western before I finished Grand Valley totally. I mean, I was just determined I'm just going to go full-time, and whether I'm working or not, and get the degree.
And then once you got the degrees, what kind of job were you looking for?
Well, my undergrad degree was in behavioral science and public administration, and my master's in public administration. So I wanted something in that arena. I got a job working for Kent County Community Mental Health, and that kind of started that part of my public service career. And then later on, some years after that, I didn't know when I was going for my degree that I'd get into elective office, but we got involved in that in the '80s. So.
Okay. Now, where did you start? Was it sort of city council? You were mayor of Kentwood at one point. What's the sequence there?
Well, I think this was much later. This was in '80. It was around '80 for me. After doing some other things, I began to pray and think about, what am I here for? I mean, what do I need to accomplish? And purpose is a big issue. I mean, I think we're all here for a certain purpose. So I felt like some area of public service was mine, and so I just wrote the mayor of Kentwood. We lived in Kentwood at the time, and said I'd like to serve anywhere you think I could be helpful. And he appointed me to a Parks and Recreation Commission. Served there for a little while, 3.5 years, and then Zoning Board of Appeals, and did that for about a year and a half, and then I was city commissioner, which is elected for about 5.5 years, about 11 years, and those before going into service mayor for 10 years, and then state senate for 8 years.
All right, and of course you did run for Congress this past year and lost in the primary at that point. Do you have regular work now, or what are you doing?
Well, now we're involved in just some speaking. I'm going to do some teaching, adjunct teaching at community college. We're talking about doing some public policy work, which could be starting in a few weeks as well. So kind of a variety of things, but still involved in public policy and staying close to involved in public service. So we'll continue to do that for a while. But I've always enjoyed and felt like part of what I do is speak on issues I'm passionate about. And we've helped start organization on marriage. We've pushed mentoring, and so I enjoy speaking about that as well as veterans issues as well.
All right. Well, you've got a pretty consistent thread here that seems to go all the way back to your time in the service, and that is that you're kind of dedicated to public service and trying to, help the people around you, and that seems to be a pretty consistent pattern.
Yes.
Aside from kind of helping develop that commitment, what do you think sort of the overall effect of your military service was on you?
I think it taught me real lessons about discipline. I remember seeing some folks there that just they couldn't take orders. Now, I don't mean that you do everything blindly, but you, as I said, the sergeants were teaching us you can't get up and argue about everything. And I saw some that had a pretty brutal time because they weren't disciplined, and it taught me about perseverance. As I said, I feel like I'm still a soldier. Sometimes you just have to set your jaw, and even though it's painful, it may be painful to watch what's going on, to watch those flags go into the basket, because you know what they represent, but you've got to continue the fight for this country, and I feel like in my own way that's what I'm doing.
All right. Well, it makes for a good story, so thank you very much for taking the time and telling it to me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the interview.